They made them to last. Thousands of years after the wooden houses of the living have disappeared, the stone cities of the dead still stand. For the Etruscans, death seemed to be simply a joyful continuation of life.
If I were an Etruscan, I'd be looking forward to my death. But it wasn't the whole story. There was a dark side to the Etruscan view of the afterlife.
And it was dramatically revealed to the world 20 years ago. In 1985, Italian workers were digging a trench for a new pipeline to supply the town of Tarquinia with water. They came across yet another buried Etruscan tomb and called in the archaeologists. The archaeologists pushed a tiny camera through the earth to investigate. What they first saw was what they expected to see. Covering one wall of the tomb were the kind of enchanting images for which the Etruscans were famous. Anyone buried here would be surrounded by paintings of a reassuring afterlife. Then the archaeologists turned their camera around, and what they saw on the opposite wall shocked them. Here were paintings of disturbing and unsettling creatures, images intended not to reassure, but to terrify.
This is the Blue Demon, the hook-nosed creature from the Etruscan underworld.
The demon's skin is the colour of rotting human flesh. He has a snake coiled around his arms. Beside him is a winged devil, ready to drag the dead off to an underworld of pain and suffering.
An Etruscan artist devised this vision of a terrifying afterlife around 420 BC, making it perhaps our oldest surviving image of hell. It's not intended to reassure, quite the opposite.
When they dated this tomb, archaeologists realized it marked a watershed. For the previous 200 years, Etruscans had created tombs full of images promising only a happy afterlife. But then something had changed.
By 400 BC, the Etruscans were combining in a single work of art images of death that were both reassuring and terrifying, rather as we do today. So what had happened?
Well, at this time, the Etruscans were being threatened by the rise of another Italian civilization, a greedy and aggressive people who would steal their land and destroy their culture. Who else but the Romans? The Etruscans knew the Romans were coming, and they knew they needed to resist them at all costs. Their tombs became a resonant call to arms because they offered a stark choice. Would you be damned or saved? These images of hell reminded the Etruscans of the gruesome fate that awaited them if they failed in their duty and surrendered. But these images of a reassuring afterlife promised Etruscans their reward if they stood up to the imminent threat. For the first time in history, these conflicting images had been brought together. The Etruscans gave us the earliest images of hell, and in doing so, they created the first ever images of what we today would call redemption. This is the place where the Etruscans built their capital. Today, it's the Italian city of Orvieto. Around 1500 AD, almost 2,000 years after the Etruscans had disappeared, Christians built a cathedral here. On its walls are two huge frescoes. One showing the damned suffering in hell. And here, those who have been saved, rising up to heaven.
Notice anything? Well, again, we've got a vision of the happy afterlife, contrasted with an intense depiction of suffering and pain in the other world, meted out by blue-green demons.
These frescoes offer the same mix of terror and reassurance as the Etruscans' tombs 2,000 years earlier.
This, if you like, was their legacy.
The artist who painted these images knew only too well the powerful effect that combining them had over the human mind.
The cleverness of the idea of redemption is that it can lead people to actually look forward to death rather than dreading it. The idea of sacrifice for the greater good is widespread. The idea of falling on that grenade for one's buddies. And then, of course, what we do is we memorialize such people. They're remembered more than the rest of us. So the idea of giving up one's life for the greater good and then getting something from that, getting redemption, and being in a better place by dying in a heroic manner.
And that's why the cross is unique. It's the one single image that's working on the human mind in two opposing ways. It's a terrifying image representing pain, loss, and suffering. And yet, at the same time, it's an image that reassures, one that holds out hope. This combination has made the cross one of the most powerful symbols ever. And it explains why, so often, it's been used to try to give meaning in the face of the incomprehensible loss of life.